The deputy didn't knock like a neighbor. He knocked like a verdict hard enough to rattle the old glass in my front door. He handed me a stamped notice and said flat as concrete, "You've got 72 hours, or the county's coming back with equipment." And behind him, my 100-year-old Victorian, the one I poured my divorce settlement into, sat there like it was already halfway condemned. I bought that house because I needed something that felt like mine again. Not a fresh start with beige walls and gray vinyl floors. No, I wanted history. Creaky stairs, real wood. The kind of place that still smelled like cedar and old paint if you opened the attic door. Maplewood Heights wasn't exactly the kind of neighborhood that appreciated personality. It was perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, the same 3 shades of approved exterior paint, and a homeowners association that treated curb appeal like national security. I did everything the responsible way. City permits licensed contractors for the electrical inspections scheduled like clockwork receipts in a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. The first month, I was actually hopeful. I'd wake up early, coffee in one hand, sanding block in the other, watching that place come back to life a little more every day. Then I met Diane Hartwell. She rolled up in a spotless white SUV and parked like she owned my driveway. Big sunglasses, pressed blouse smile that never reached her eyes, she walked up my path and introduced herself as the president of the HOA, like that was an elected office in Washington. "Welcome to Maplewood Heights," she said, holding out a thick packet. "This is our Homeowners Association Compliance Guide. You'll want to read it carefully." I told her politely that I was restoring the original design and everything was permitted through the city. Diane tilted her head and did that sweet little laugh thing people do when they're about to make your life miserable. "City permits are the minimum, Ethan," she said. "The HOA is the standard." 2 days later, the first violation notice arrived in my mailbox. Not a warning, an invoice. Exterior paint color, not compliant with community aesthetic, it said. And there it was, in bold, $500 per day until corrected. $500. Per day. Because my historic navy blue trim wasn't warm enough. I called the HOA office number. Straight to voicemail. I called Diane. She answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting. "Oh yes," she said, like we were discussing the weather. "The board already voted. This is an urgent case, so we didn't need to notify you ahead of time." Urgent, because of paint. I drove to the management office the next morning, binder in hand, ready to calmly explain this had been approved by the city and documented as a restoration. The receptionist looked at my paperwork like it was a menu and said, "You need to email that to the compliance department." "What's the email?" I asked. She slid a sticky note toward me. It was blank. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a normal disagreement. I was dealing with someone who'd decided I was a project. The notices kept coming too like clockwork, like harassment with letterhead. Construction noise outside, approved hours. Debris visible from the street. Unapproved material storage. Unsafe worksite conditions. The funny part was I wasn't even the loudest house on the block. My neighbor ran a leaf blower like it was a hobby. At 7 a.m., nobody cared. But me, I sneezed wrong and a violation would appear. One afternoon, a city inspector named Mark Kowalski showed up unannounced. He wasn't rude, just tired, like he'd been dragged into something he didn't want to be in. "There's been a complaint," he said, holding up his tablet. "They say you're doing unpermitted structural work." I felt my jaw tighten. "Mark, I've got permits for everything," I said, and I walked him straight to my binder like I'd been waiting my whole life for this moment. He flipped through it, nodding. Then he showed me the evidence submitted by the Homeowners Association. It was a set of photos of my house taken at angles that made it look like a disaster trash in the foreground shadows that exaggerated everything, framing that screamed, "This place is a hazard." I stared at them and felt my stomach drop because that's not what my property looked like. Mark rubbed his face and lowered his voice. "Between you and me," he said, "Diane calls my supervisor twice a week. She's persistent." Then he pointed at one photo and said, "This shadow line doesn't make sense. It rained that day." He looked at me like he was giving me a quiet warning. Someone's trying to build a case. That night I pulled my security camera footage, and there it was. Diane standing across the street with a long lens camera taking pictures like she was filming a documentary about my downfall. Then later, way later, an old sedan rolled up, parked right in front of my house, and somebody got out and started moving things around near the curb. A trash bag, a broken piece of wood, some random junk that didn't belong to me. They arranged it like a set. I watched the whole thing in silence, the kind of silence where your ears ring because your brain is trying to catch up. It wasn't just strict rules, it was sabotage. And still, I tried to be reasonable. I emailed, I documented, I asked for hearings, I asked for copies of the votes they claimed happened. Most of the time I got nothing back. Or I got one sentence that felt like a slap. You are responsible for compliance regardless of circumstances. The fines started stacking fast. Paint fine, debris, fine noise fine, plus administrative fees for the privilege of being targeted. There was one night I sat on my living room floor back against the wall staring at my spreadsheet. Numbers don't care about your pride. And my numbers were telling me something simple. If this kept going another month, I was done. Not in a dramatic movie way. In a sell the house half finished and eat the loss way. I remember thinking real plain. Maybe I don't have the bankroll to outlast a bully with a budget. And that thought scared me more than the deputy at my door. The shift happened because two people decided I wasn't alone. The first was Janet Pierce. She was on the HOA board, and she asked me to meet her at a coffee shop like we were in some low-budget spy movie. She slid a folder across the table and said, "I don't like what Diane's doing, and you need to see this." Inside were records, violation histories, complaint logs, and something that made my blood go cold. Diane owned multiple rental properties in Maplewood Heights through an LLC, and those homes, somehow, never got fined. Not once. Not for junk cans, not for ugly fences, not for unapproved additions, nothing. Selective enforcement, a fancy phrase for punish who I want to ignore who benefits me. The second person was Laura Cole, an attorney who'd made a career out of dealing with homeowners association overreach. She didn't hype me up. She didn't do inspirational speeches. She just said stop talking on the phone. Start building a case. So I did. I logged every notice. I saved every email. I requested meeting minutes. I took photos with timestamps. I pulled weather data to match dates against staged shadows. I exported camera footage, backed it up twice, and printed screenshots like I was preparing for court because I was. Emily Walsh, a local reporter, answered my email with one line, "Do you have proof I sent her a clip of the midnight staging?" She replied, "Oh, wow." And then, like the universe finally decided to stop laughing, my real twist showed up in the attic. I'd been going through an old trunk I found behind a stack of dusty insulation, mostly looking for anything sentimental. Instead, I found documents, yellowed papers, brittle edges, the kind of handwriting you have to tilt into the light to read. One was a recorded deed from 1924, and attached to it was an easement legal language that basically said my property had permanent rights to a narrow access corridor behind the houses, and that the original parcel was exempt from certain association restrictions that came decades later. I read it twice slow. Then I pulled up the neighborhood plat map. That corridor cut right behind Diane Hartwell's backyard. The next board meeting was packed. People love drama when it's not happening to them. And by then, Emily's reporter friend had already started asking questions around the neighborhood. Diane sat at the front table, gavel in hand, chin lifted like she was about to sentence me. She opened the meeting and went straight for me. "Ethan Parker remains in violation," she announced. "We have been more than patient. His property is a blight. A blight. On a street of identical tan boxes." I stood up with a cardboard file box and set it down on the table. It hit the wood with a heavy thump that made the room go quiet. "No speeches," I said, "just facts." I started laying it out one piece at a time like bricks. The staged photos, the selective enforcement logs, the LLC records, the emails where my requests for hearings were ignored. Diane's smile stayed on her face for exactly 10 seconds, and then it started to crack at the corners. "This is harassment," she snapped. "You're trying to distract from your non-compliance." I slid the 1924 easement copy across the table right toward her hand. "And this," I said, "is why you've been so desperate to make me fold." Her eyes flicked down to the map, then back up to me. I kept my voice calm because calm hits harder when someone expects you to yell. "That access corridor runs behind the properties. It's recorded with the county. It gives me legal rights to pass through, meaning your patio extension and your little storage shed are sitting right where they shouldn't be." Diane stood up so fast her chair screeched. "That's ridiculous. That's fake. You forged that." I nodded once. "Great," I said. "Then let's verify it. Right now, We can call the county clerk, or we can have a surveyor on site tomorrow morning." She looked around for backup. Janet wouldn't meet her eyes. 2 board members stared at their hands like they'd suddenly discovered religion. And right on cue, Laura walked in professional quiet, holding a stack of papers, like she was delivering a pizza nobody ordered. She stepped to Diane and said, "Diane Hartwell, you've been served." Diane blinked like she didn't understand the words. Laura kept going even tone, no emotion. "This filing alleges abuse of authority, defamation, and selective enforcement under the Homeowners Association rules plus interference with permitted construction." In the back of the room, somebody whispered, "Oh my God." And Diane, who'd been so comfortable throwing fines like confetti, suddenly looked like a person who realized consequences are real. The vote happened fast after that, not because the board suddenly grew a spine, but because self-preservation is a powerful motivator. A motion was made to remove Diane as president pending investigation, seconded immediately. Diane tried to speak, but her voice came out thin like air leaking from a balloon. "This is outrageous," she said. "But it didn't land." "Not anymore." The gavel she loved so much got set down by someone else, and for the first time since I moved in, the room wasn't hers. I walked out before anyone could say anything comforting. I didn't want comfort. I just wanted my front door to feel like my front door again. Lesson learned: never underestimate what a small person will do with a little power, and never walk into an HOA fight without receipts.